When I first moved into her guest house, I told myself it was just for a few months, long enough to finish the renovation work, help her with the repairs, and maybe earn enough to get back on my feet. But even on that first morning, when she opened the door with that soft, unhurried smile, I knew this house was going to feel different. Her name was Clara, 43. A widow for almost 2 years, though she carried her grief quietly, like a secret she had made peace with. She wasn't the kind of woman who tried to fill silence with noise. She simply existed in it, calmly, as if every moment had its own rhythm. At first, our days were all routine. I'd start early, sanding the old porch or fixing the broken shutters. She'd bring out coffee, always black for her, sweet for me, and sit on the steps while I worked. We didn't talk much, not at first. But she had this way of making silence feel like a conversation. A small smile. A quiet glance. The occasional hum of a tune from another time. The sun in those mornings always seemed softer here. It would stream through the leaves, catch in her hair, and light the faint lines at the corner of her eyes. She looked grounded, like someone who had seen enough of life to stop pretending. Sometimes she'd help me paint, though she wasn't particularly good at it. Her hand would brush mine when I passed her the roller, and she'd laugh low, warm, a little embarrassed. It wasn't flirting. It was something gentler, like the shared amusement of two people who found comfort in small things. There was something steady about her presence. It calmed me in ways I couldn't explain. I'd spent years rushing through everything: work, relationships, expectations. But around Clara, I found myself slowing down, listening, watching. One afternoon, while fixing a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink, I caught her humming to herself by the window. The tune was faint, almost nostalgic. I remember looking up for a second, water dripping onto my hands, and realizing that I hadn't felt this kind of peace in a long time. Not attraction, at least, not then. It was admiration. Respect. That night, I sat on the porch alone, the smell of fresh paint still in the air. She'd gone to bed early, leaving her cup of tea beside mine. The moonlight hit the rim just enough to make it gleam. It felt symbolic somehow, 2 cups, side by side, still warm. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet trust we'd built, the soft exchanges, the easy laughter, the simple comfort of being seen, was already weaving something fragile between us. Something that, in time, would be tested in ways neither of us saw coming. It started with rain. Not the loud, angry kind, but a steady, comforting drizzle that softened everything it touched. I'd just finished sealing the porch railings when Clara stepped out, holding an umbrella that was far too small for both of us. She laughed when I ducked under it anyway, our shoulders brushing. "Dinner's ready," she said, voice warm against the rhythm of the rain. Inside, the lights were low, and the scent of roasted garlic and thyme filled the kitchen. She'd cooked pasta, poured 2 glasses of wine, and played an old jazz record that crackled gently from the corner. It wasn't a fancy evening, just 2 people trying to shake off the weight of a long day, but somehow, it felt like more than that. We sat across from each other, steam rising from our plates. The conversation began lightly, stories about my small-town childhood, her early years in this house, the stubborn lemon tree that never bore fruit. But as the rain grew heavier, so did the air between us. She told me about her husband. Not in a broken way, but with a kind of distant fondness, like someone revisiting a faded photograph. How he used to fix the same porch I was working on. How she still caught herself setting the table for 2. I listened quietly, my chest tightening with something I didn't yet understand. When she smiled through the ache, I wanted to tell her she didn't have to. That it was okay to miss someone and still move forward. But I didn't say it. Some silences are better honored than filled. She turned the question back to me, asked about the last person I'd cared for. I told her the truth, that I'd been running from the idea of closeness for a while now. Too many goodbyes. Too many almosts. For the storm came without warning. By late evening, the rain had turned fierce, drumming against the roof like an unbroken heartbeat. I was in the guest house when the lights flickered once, then died completely. The quiet that followed was sharp, heavy, and unfamiliar. Through the curtain, I could see only the faint outline of her house, one small candle burning in the window. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and dashed through the rain. Clara opened the door before I could knock. Her hair was damp, falling loosely around her face, and she held a single candle that made her eyes glow amber in the dimness. "Power's out," I said, though it was obvious. She smiled faintly. "I figured you'd come check anyway." Inside, the house felt smaller somehow, walls closer, air warmer. She had gathered a few candles around the living room, their light trembling against the framed photos on the shelves. The storm outside seemed distant here, replaced by the quiet crackle of melting wax and the soft rhythm of our breathing. "I used to hate nights like this," she said softly, sitting on the couch. "Too many memories in the dark." I sat beside her, careful to keep a respectful space. "You don't have to be alone through them anymore." For a long time, we just listened to the rain. The candlelight moved over her hands, resting in her lap, and I noticed how she kept twisting her wedding ring, still on her finger, though faintly loose now. There was something sacred in that gesture, something both painful and peaceful. When thunder rolled, she flinched slightly. Instinctively, I placed a hand near hers on the couch. Not touching, just close enough for her to feel I was there. She looked at me, a small, grateful glance that lingered a heartbeat too long. Then she laughed quietly, almost to herself. "I'm sorry. I must seem foolish." "Not at all," I said. "It's strange how the quiet can make everything feel louder." She nodded, her gaze drifting toward the candlelight. "Sometimes I think it's not the thunder I'm afraid of," she said. "It's remembering what comes after." The silence. Her voice cracked just slightly, and before I could stop myself, I reached out and rested my hand over hers. Her skin was warm, trembling beneath my palm. She didn't pull away. Outside, the storm surged, wind against the windows, rain against the glass. Inside, it felt like time had slowed down. The space between us narrowed to a breath. And then, for the first time, I felt something shift, quietly, invisibly, but real. A boundary neither of us named, but both suddenly aware of. When the thunder faded, we stayed still. My hand remained over hers, steady and protective. Nothing more. Nothing less. But in that moment, under the flickering glow of candlelight and rain, I realized how dangerous comfort could feel when you cared too much. Sometime past midnight, the storm softened. The house was wrapped in a deep, hushed quiet, the kind that almost hums. I had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket thrown over me, the candle long since melted to a puddle of wax. I woke to a sound, faint at first, then clearer. A soft cry from down the hall. "Clara." I hesitated only a moment before I rose and followed the sound. Her bedroom door was half open, candlelight flickering weakly from inside. She was sitting upright in bed, clutching the sheets, breath quick and uneven. "Clara," I whispered, keeping my voice low. Her eyes opened, dazed, trying to pull herself back to the present. "I'm sorry," she murmured, pressing a hand to her chest. "Just a bad dream." It felt so real. I stepped closer, unsure of what to do. "It's all right. You're safe." She nodded but didn't speak. Her shoulders shook once, a quiet tremor she tried to hide. The room was dim, smelling faintly of rain and lavender. I wanted to offer comfort, but I also knew how fragile this moment was, how easily it could be misunderstood. Still, when she reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold. I sat on the edge of the bed, steadying her hand in mine until her breathing slowed. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I still wake up thinking he's beside me. And when I realize he isn't, it feels like losing him all over again." Her words stayed suspended between us, soft and breaking. I wanted to say something, anything, to take that pain from her, but no words felt right. Instead, I tightened my grip slightly, letting silence speak for me. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes glistened, searching, uncertain. The distance between us felt impossibly small. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in the room. For a second, she leaned forward, her forehead resting lightly against my shoulder. It was instinct, not thought. Grief, not romance. But the warmth of her closeness, the weight of her trust, struck something deep in me. I closed my eyes, letting her cry quietly against me. Her tears dampened my shirt, and I could feel the soft tremor of her breath. When she finally pulled back, her gaze lingered on mine, full of emotion I couldn't name. We didn't speak. We didn't move. It was the kind of moment that could tip either way into comfort or something we might regret. But neither of us crossed it. We just stayed there, held by something larger than either of us, something that demanded both tenderness and restraint. "Thank you," she whispered finally. I nodded. "You don't have to thank me." As I walked back to the couch, I could still feel the warmth of her hand in mine, soft, trembling, human. The night had tested us, not through temptation, but through the simple ache of being seen too deeply. And as the first light of dawn touched the curtains, I realized trust isn't proven in easy moments. It's in the ones where your heart wants more, and you choose to stay still. Morning came with sunlight that felt too sharp for how little either of us had slept. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and impossibly bright. I woke to the smell of coffee drifting through the hall, familiar, comforting, but today it carried a different weight. When I walked into the kitchen, Clara was already there. She wore a light sweater over her nightshirt, hair pulled back loosely, a small attempt at normalcy. The moment she saw me, something in her posture changed, just slightly, almost invisible, but I felt it. A quiet retreat. "Morning," I said softly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There's coffee," she replied, her voice steady, practiced. The clink of the spoon in her mug filled the silence. Usually, we'd talk about the day ahead, what repairs needed finishing, what errands she planned to run, but today, words felt like trespass. I sat across from her, both of us pretending not to remember the way the night had felt, her tears against my shoulder, my hand holding hers too long, the fragile line we hadn't crossed, but had certainly seen. I wanted to tell her it was all right, that nothing had changed. But that would have been a lie. Something had changed, something we couldn't name without breaking it further. When she finally looked up, her eyes were calm but distant. "You should take the day off," she said. "You've been working nonstop since you got here." I nodded, though we both knew rest wasn't what she meant. "All right," I said. "I'll go into town for a bit. Maybe I stopped myself. Give you some quiet." Her lips curved into a polite smile. "That sounds good." It was strange how two people could sit in the same room and feel miles apart. The easy rhythm we'd built, the laughter, the warmth, had been replaced by careful pauses and measured distance. I could feel her gratitude for what hadn't happened, and her fear of what almost did. I left the house an hour later, walking aimlessly through the small town. The streets glistened with leftover rain, shop fronts still damp. Every sound felt louder, the distant bell of a bicycle, the chatter of strangers. I kept seeing her face in my mind, the way her expression softened when she let her guard down, the quiet strength it took to pull it back up again. By the time I returned that evening, the air between us had settled into something polite and quiet. Dinner was brief. She thanked me for fixing the leak that had caused the flooding in the hallway. I told her it was nothing. We exchanged small smiles, the kind that know more than they say. Later, alone in the guest house, I sat by the window and watched her porch light glow through the trees. I thought about the trust she had placed in me, how fragile and rare it was, and how easily it could have been broken. That night, the rain didn't come back, but the silence felt just as heavy. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I wondered if closeness always carried a cost. A few quiet days passed before either of us mentioned that night again. We fell into a rhythm of polite avoidance, small smiles, safe topics, and enough space to convince ourselves everything was fine. But it wasn't. The silence between us had shape now. It wasn't empty, it was full of everything we didn't say. On the third evening, the air felt too still to ignore it any longer. The sun was dipping low, painting the house in soft gold. I was finishing up some work on the porch railing when I heard her voice behind me. "Can we talk?" I turned, wiping the dust from my hands. She stood by the doorway, hesitant but steady. There was a quiet vulnerability in her eyes, the same look she'd worn that night, only this time, she wasn't hiding behind it. We sat at the porch table, the same place where so many easy conversations had begun. Only this one didn't start with coffee or laughter. It started with silence. I've been thinking about what happened, she said finally. Her tone was calm, almost practiced, but her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. About how I acted. I was vulnerable. And I might have blurred things that shouldn't have been blurred. I shook my head gently. You didn't do anything wrong, Clara. You were hurting. I should have given you more space. She looked up, meeting my eyes. No, you did exactly what a kind person would do. That's what makes it harder. You didn't take advantage, you cared. And for a moment, that scared me more than anything. Her honesty landed deep. I didn't know what to say at first. So I just breathed, letting the words settle between us. You don't have to be scared of care, I said eventually. It doesn't have to mean more than what it is. A small smile tugged at her lips, tired, grateful. You remind me that kindness can exist without expectation. I'd forgotten that. We sat quietly, watching the sunset fade behind the trees. The air smelled of wood and rain-soaked leaves. There was something healing in that stillness, not the forced kind, but the slow, earned kind that follows truth. She reached across the table then, her hand resting gently over mine. The gesture was soft, but it carried everything words couldn't. I do trust you, she said quietly. That hasn't changed. I turned my hand, fingers brushing hers lightly. And I trust you, I answered. More than I probably should. We both laughed, small, real, unguarded. For the first time in days, the air felt easy again. When the porch light came on, we stayed there a while longer, neither of us in a hurry to leave. The silence had changed again, no longer heavy, but calm, like something fragile that had finally found its place. That night, I realized that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it lives quietly in the space between two people brave enough to speak after the silence. Weeks passed, and the house felt alive again. Not in the noisy, chaotic way of before, but in a gentler rhythm, the kind that only comes after two people have walked through silence and come out still beside each other. Clara had returned to her routines, tending the small garden by the fence, watering her stubborn lemon tree, humming softly as she worked. And I kept busy finishing the last few details of the renovation, replacing old hinges, sanding the doorframe smooth. It felt good to move with purpose again, though I knew it wasn't the work that grounded me. It was her presence. Things between us had settled into something quieter, purer. We still shared coffee in the mornings, but the glances were easier now, not full of question marks or unspoken apologies, just calm understanding. Sometimes our hands brushed when passing a cup, and we both smiled, not out of tension, but gratitude. There were still moments, small, fleeting ones, when I caught her looking at me with that thoughtful stillness in her eyes, as if trying to understand how something so simple had become so meaningful. But neither of us felt the need to define it anymore. It wasn't love, not exactly. It wasn't friendship, either. It was something that existed in the delicate space between, built on respect, care, and a shared promise not to let one hard night ruin the beauty of what we'd found. One evening, just as the sun was melting into the horizon, she brought out 2 mugs of tea and joined me on the porch. The sky glowed orange and violet, the air cool and soft. Hard to believe it's almost time for you to leave, she said, her voice even, though her eyes lingered longer than usual. I smiled faintly. Feels like I just got here. You did, she said. At least, that's how it feels. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas hum in the distance. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. I was afraid, that what happened that night would ruin everything. But instead, it reminded me I'm still human, that it's okay to feel something again. I looked at her then, really looked at the way her hair caught the dying light, at the quiet strength in her expression. You helped me remember that too, I said softly. That caring doesn't have to be complicated. It can just exist. She smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. Then maybe we both learned what trust really means. As twilight deepened, we didn't move closer or farther away. We just stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, warm cups in our hands, watching the light fade gently into night. When I finally stood to leave, she touched my arm lightly. Take care of yourself, she said, her voice warm, steady. You too, I whispered. And as I walked back to the guest house, the sound of her humming floated through the air, the same tune I'd heard the first week I arrived. It felt different now. Lighter. That night, as I packed my things, I realized we hadn't just rebuilt a house. We'd rebuilt something far more fragile, a kind of trust that didn't need to be defined to be real. And maybe that was enough.